We're just going to wait a few more minutes to make sure everybody's here, including our main speaker, so be patient with us. Thank you. We were thinking about having comment cards, but I'm trying to gauge how many more people will come. Right now, I don't think it's necessary. Let me ask, at this point, how many of you are intending to be making comments today? Raise your hand for me. Okay, thank you. We're all going to be in a listening mode. And depending on what's said, of course, you have the right to change your mind, but I don't think we're going to need comment cards, Madam Clerk, but what is your thought based on this? I don't think so, but people may come in and I'll reserve the right to change my mind if a flux of 20 comes in all at one time. All right, thanks. All right, I think the main show has arrived. We can get started. No problem. Take your time getting yourself together. All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Welcome to our joint session with the Planning Commission and the City Council. Call the meeting to order, and first thing of business is to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Let me inquire again. I inquired earlier. How many of you intend at this point to give public comment? 1, 2, 3. Not too many. Does depend. If everybody raised their hand, then I would use comment cards just to keep some order, and I would reduce the amount of time we typically have from 4 minutes to 3 minutes. It doesn't appear that I'll need to do that tonight, but I just wanted to keep that in mind. Madam Clerk, we're on to item 3, adoption of the agenda. Are any additions or changes I need to note for the record?
There are none.
All right, then I'll look for a motion to adopt the agenda from one of my council members.
I'll make a motion to adopt.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to adopt the agenda. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. That passes. On to item 4. We have roll call. Madam Clerks.
Sorry, that was a little out of order. My apologies. Mayor Doring.
Here.
Vice Mayor Deasy. Councilmember Barrick.
Here.
Spataro.
Here.
Summers.
Here.
Acting Chair Warner.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Cavell.
Here.
Burdick.
Here.
And Lopez.
Here. All right. Planning Commissioners, colleagues, thank you for joining us, and thank you for your service. I don't often have a chance to let you know how much I am grateful for your service to our community. You do a wonderful job. Also wanted to extend a special thanks to John Pont, previous chair. We have an acting chair. Mr. Warner's here. I'm looking forward to an educational presentation about housing law and legislation and how it affects our city. But I just wanted to let you all know that your service is not gone unnoticed by me. So thank you so much for doing what you do for our community. All right. We typically, on special sessions like this, we typically have the public forum, the comment during the item presentation. So we're going to move right down to item 6, which is new business. And the title of this new business is discussion on state housing legislation and its impact on local housing policies. And before I introduce Mr. Rosa, I wanted to offer an opportunity for the acting chair to maybe make a comment or two about what the expectations are today and where we're going. Mr. Warner, welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm Chris Warner, acting chair of the Planning Commission. I just want to also reference we have a full group of our commissioners on the Planning Commission. I am delighted that we have a new commissioner, Michelle, here. What I think is so important on a Planning Commission, as it is with the City Council, is that we're representative of the community. We are part of the community. We are you, and you are we, and we're here to represent you. This is a great opportunity not only to educate on some of the most current housing policies in the state of California that affect us locally, but I just want to mention a couple things that I hope we all keep in mind, because I'm looking forward to the public comment and the public questions and answers, because for those of us in the Planning Commission and the City Council, hearing from you, the members of the community, is the most important thing, because we all live, work, raise our families here, and it's so important that we basically be in sync with your thoughts too. The availability of housing is a crisis not only in California but nationwide. We know that. That's a given. And it's particularly a crisis for young families and for workers. The need for housing and the solutions, frankly, and we'll hear more about this in our presentation, are not going to come by or with particular laws directly regulations or mandates from governments, including from California. That's my personal opinion. We're going to hear about those mandates tonight, but they don't solve the housing crisis. The solutions must come from economic changes, such as lower interest and mortgage rates for families, for workers, for others, lower housing costs for home buyers and housing developers. But even more importantly, the solutions must come, as they always have, from communities coming together and deciding themselves what they want for their neighborhoods and communities to be and become. That's what is important, I think, to hear from all of you and to hear among ourselves tonight. What do we want St. Helena as a community to be in terms of housing availability? It's important to understand what the state policymakers are telling us, and we're going to hear about that in a minute. But it's more important, in my opinion, and I believe my fellow commissioners share this, for us to decide among ourselves here in our own St. Helena community what we want, not what Sacramento tells us or mandates, and we have to comply with those mandates. I'm a lawyer, so I know it's important to comply with the law. But we need to work together here in St. Helena to have more to do with solutions to the housing crisis than anything else. So I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to hear from all of you as members of the community, as well as our expert here. Again, we've got a very superb presentation here by one of the state's leading experts on housing laws, as well as our great indefatigable staff leader, Maya. So without further ado, those are my comments, Mr. Mayor. I look forward to hearing from everybody.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Rosa.
We can advance to the next slide. And thank you, Mayor Doring, members of the City Council, Planning Commission. It's an honor to bring this workshop to you and to the public, and I really appreciate the public attendance here tonight because this is definitely a very important, vital item for us as a community to really deeply understand things that we're working on today and how it will affect us tomorrow and even generations from now. So this is a two-part presentation. I'm going to run through our agenda, and then I have a brief couple of slides just to set the framework for what we'll be talking about on just current housing pipeline projects, and then I will hand it over to Ms. Kotz. So our agenda briefly today will cover the purpose of the meeting. We'll be talking about just some background on our housing growth. That includes what projects that are currently in the pipeline. And then the remainder of the presentation by our guest speaker will cover housing policy, the Housing Accountability Act, density bonus, by right approvals, some recent budget trailer bills, as well as litigation, HCD, and some recent court actions. And then a pause there with, well, what can cities do about all this current and pending legislation, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, public comment, and then we'll just do a wrap up with the council and the planning commission. So the whole impetus of this meeting really is to educate our community. I noticed that a few years ago, the town of Los Gatos had done a similar session with Ms. Kotz, and it was really beneficial to them because they were grappling with a lot of infill housing projects and intersecting with a lot of new legislation. So that's where the impetus for the idea to offer this to our community came from. We'll discuss the limitations on denial of a housing project, and then I think I covered the rest of my prior slide. And then specifically, I just did want to say that, that on the agenda tonight is not to talk about any specific housing projects currently in St. Helena. So this is a land use discussion tonight, and so the framework for all of understanding that really actually comes from our general plan, which was actually recently adopted in 2019. It basically is our blueprint for a community. So there is actually a very strategic methodology to how we look at development in the city, and all cities have an adopted general plan. It's a state law requirement. This exhibit, and I can't read the legend, but just to kind of show you graphically, the yellow and the oranges represent where housing is currently either existing or planned in the future. The housing land use designations make up 19% of our total 3,200 acres of land in the city limits. So you can see it's actually a pretty small part of our overall land use mix. Next slide. And also, if you really dive into the general plan, there's a part called a land use element, and this is a page from that spells out what are the allowed density and intensity ranges for all development in St. Helena. So we actually do have very prescriptive standards for that, and depending on how a parcel is designated, we apply these. This is just one of many either policies or standards which is also further refined through our zoning code that has much more prescriptive standards. But as you can see on this slide, we have three main land use residential categories that are low density residential, medium density residential, and higher density residential. And the density ranges are as low as 1 dwelling units per acre all the way up to 28 units per acre with the higher density residential. And in tandem and alongside a general plan, every city is required to adopt a housing element. I know some of my planning commissioners and some council members have actually been through that process with us recently. We adopted our housing element in September of 2023. It's a very long, tedious process to get this to follow all the new rules by the state, but APAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, actually kicks off the process by assigning each city in the state of California an allocation of housing units that they're required to build. And so our allocation, or what we call the RENA, for our city is 256, and then that has to be split up among the 3 income categories that you see on the slide, which are low, moderate, and above moderate. And so on the right side of the slide, that basically is just showing our progress to date. Every year we have to provide what we call an annual progress report to HC to tell them how many building permits have we issued and what income category. So this just is a little touch point of where we are to date. And then this is what is currently in the Community Development Department under review. So starting with the Hunter subdivision, which many of you know 2 years ago went through the tentative map process with an EIR. That was approved. This number, the 75, doesn't include the 11 ADUs. I was just mostly focusing on the single family and the multifamily proposed. They're currently right now in the final map process and an affordable housing agreement, which we expect to take to City Council this fall for approval. And then they still have further entitlements they need to secure before any development could occur. The next one on the list, the Our Town St. Helena, we have a multifamily project that if you've driven up and down Pope Street recently, you'll actually see that project is very quickly underway, making great progress. That's at 951 and 963 Pope. There will be ultimately 10 units on that site. One of them was already an existing single-family home. But this is all going to be a 100% affordable project, which is fantastic, and we're expecting completion in 2026. And then we are also working with Our Town St. Helena on a multifamily project that is actually right across the street here between Mills Lane and Dowdell, and that is planning on a total of 39 affordable apartments. And then lastly, we have the Spring Grove Townhome Project, which is our housing element site 9. It's known as 1447 and 1515 Spring Street, an infill opportunity, and we're currently in the process of working with the applicant, getting their tentative map and density bonus over the finish line. That would be ultimately a total of 41 units when completed. So that puts us in our pipeline a total of 156. And then there's just a footnote down at the bottom that I know there's been a lot of community interest about another site on Spring Street at 1933. We have not received any application or plans to date, but we do know that a new landowner purchased that site not too long ago, and they're expressing interest in developing a multifamily project, which at the minimum density would be at least 71 units. And if you want to further study like where are all the rest of the sites, this is figure 49 in our housing element, which you can find on our city website. But essentially we have a total of 12 sites that HCD from the state approved. All right, so that kind of just lays the landscape of where we are currently housing-wise, and now it's my pleasure. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about our guest speaker here, Barbara Katz. She was kind enough to share her bio, which I think you will be very impressed to hear. So she currently practices with Goldfarb & Lippmann LLP in the areas of land use, with an emphasis on housing-related legislation, including the Housing Accountability Act, SB 35, inclusionary zoning and implementation, density bonuses, and other recent changes to housing law. She also specializes in CEQA NEPA compliance and affordable housing. She has over 40 years of land use experience. Prior to joining Goldfarb & Lippmann LLP, she was the Community Development Director and Assistant City Manager for the City of San Mateo. She speaks frequently at conferences and before public agencies regarding housing issues and is a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners, a member of the Board of Counselors at USF School of Law, and past editor of the Land Use Chapter in the Municipal Law Handbook. She formerly served on the boards of directors for the League of California Cities and the California chapter of the American Planning Association. Ms. Katz holds her law degree summa cum laude from the University of San Francisco, holds a Master of City Planning from the University of California, Berkeley, and is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Stanford University. So please welcome our guest speaker, Barbara Katz.
Well, thank you very much. It's embarrassing to have your whole bio read. So I'm going to talk, as was said, about California's housing laws. I'm not going to talk about my personal view of how effective they are. I have views about housing policy, but what I'm going to try to do is talk about the most important laws that the legislature has passed really since 2017. It's been a flood of bills. There have been over 300 bills passed about housing. And my presentation is only going to cover a fraction of the new laws. You're familiar with many of the others, like around accessory dwelling units, but mostly the ones that affect review of housing projects like the ones that Maya showed you are in the pipeline. Next slide. So Maya already talked about the presentation overview. I'm talked about very little about kind of the state's view of housing policy, the Housing Accountability Act, which has included many of the provisions that the legislature has adopted, density bonuses, by right approval in St. Helena. In the budget trailer bills, this got a lot of press, big article in the New York Times. The legislature adopted additional housing bills that went into effect immediately. I'm going to talk a bit about our experience with litigation, HCD in the courts. We've litigated a number of these issues. And lastly, talk a bit about what cities can do. So next slide, and then next slide. So I think that this policy, which is included in the Housing Accountability Act, really says everything about the legislature's view of local government and of housing policy. And what they say is that the point is to curb the capability of local governments to deny or reduce the density of or make housing development projects infeasible. And every year, the legislature tightens up the legislation, adopts harsher and harsher penalties for not doing what the laws say, or for even what HCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, says, and essentially makes it very difficult for cities to deny any housing project. The legislature views that local government is a major barrier toward housing construction, and the policy behind a lot of the laws I'm going to go through is to free developers from constraints posed by local government. Next slide. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about some of the key provisions of the Housing Accountability Act. Next slide. The first one is the ability of developers to submit what's called a preliminary application. And what a preliminary application does is it freezes all the city's development standards in place. So once someone submits a preliminary application with only a few exceptions, everything that the city can require the developer to do must already be in place. What is a preliminary application? It's like a mini planning application, but it has very, very limited requirements. There's very little that a developer needs to submit to basically vest their rights to the city's laws as they exist when the preliminary application is filed. So the city could find that, oh my gosh, we didn't adopt this, or we meant to do it. If it's not in place and in effect when the preliminary application is filed, the city can't require it, again, as I said, with very limited exceptions. The one limitation on this is that an application, a real application, has to be filed within 180 days, and the applicant has to complete the application within 90 days of receiving an incomplete letter, and it can be submitted for any housing project. Next slide. There's also a 5-meeting limit for housing projects. The city can't hold more than 5 public meetings on a project after the project is found to be complete by the city. Now, when somebody submits an application, the staff looks it over. They have 30 days to decide if the application's complete. If you hold a hearing during that period, then it doesn't count, because it only counts after the housing project, after the application's complete. But once the application's complete, there's a strict limit to 5 public hearings, and effective January 1st, legislation was adopted saying they can sue you for denying the project if you hold more than 5 hearings. It includes appeals, it includes continuances, and it includes any meeting organized by the city. So if the developer chooses to organize a neighborhood meeting, fine. But if the city organizes a neighborhood meeting after the project's complete, that is part of the 5 meeting limit. Next slide. So the really key provision of the Housing Accountability Act is that a project can be denied only if it doesn't comply with the city's objective standards, or if it results in a specific adverse impact on public health and safety. And that's defined as a significant, quantifiable, direct, and unavoidable impact based on objective, identified, written public health or safety standards that were in place when the preliminary application was submitted that can't be mitigated. So what might be a health and safety standard? A city that requires a sidewalk next to a 4-lane highway. That would be a health and safety standard. Septic tank standards, certain requirements perhaps for underground utilities in a very high fire hazard zone, something like that. But they need to be adopted at the time the preliminary application was submitted. So I worked with one city where there was community submitted quite a bit of evidence about problems with fire evacuation, but the city had no objective standards, and as a consequence, they couldn't do anything about it. Next slide. Then, if a project is considered to be affordable, the city must make one of 5 findings to deny it in addition, or to adopt a condition that makes the project infeasible. And a project's considered to be affordable if it meets any of these standards: 13 low, 10% very low, 7% extremely low income, or has 10 or fewer units, even with no affordable units, at a density of 10 units an acre on a site smaller than an acre. Next slide. And I think that most of the projects that you're considering probably meet this definition. So the city can deny one of these projects only if it doesn't comply with both the zoning and the general plan land use categories. If there's a specific adverse impact, doesn't comply with state or federal law, zoned for, doesn't have adequate water or sewer, or if it's zoned for ag or resource protection and surrounded on two sides by sites actually used for that. So, so this was the legislature's goal, right? To make it very difficult to deny a housing project. Next slide. So all the new laws talk about objective standards. What's an objective standard? The definition in the statutes is that it involves no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and can be verified by looking at an external benchmark. Okay, height limits, density requirements, you can only get 10 units an acre, you can only cover 20% of the lot, you have to be 5 feet from the property line, you can only have this much floor area. Those are all objective. Things that are subjective reflects the character of the community or reflects the look and feel of the community, because what does that mean? People might have different opinions about it. Has to be compatible with adjacent uses. What does that mean? Again, different people. Now you can define what compatibility means. For instance, you can say, like in Santa Barbara, everything has to be Spanish style, and they have very defined what Spanish style means. Or you can say it means that it can't be more than 1 story higher than adjacent uses. You can define that, but these subjective standards can't be used to deny a project. You can't deny a project because it's not compatible with adjacent uses. Next slide. So there's one case, there's a published case that looks at what's not an objective standard. And the city standard, which the city attorney thought was objective, was that if the height varies by more than 1 story between the buildings, a transition or step in height is necessary. And this project had a 1-story single-family house next to it, and you can see the project's 3 or 4 stories high. Next slide. Why did the court say this wasn't objective? They said the transition could be trees and a trellis instead of a step back. It wasn't clear how far the upper floors had to step back. It wasn't clear how far along the building the step back had to be. And it wasn't clear how many floors had to be stepped back. So now the one good thing they did say in this particular case is that the city could have applied a condition saying the upper floors should be stepped back farther, but so long as that didn't reduce the density. But they couldn't deny the project based on the fact that the standard, because the standard wasn't objective. Next slide. Okay, so what are the implications if the city's reviewing a project? It's a very strict standard for objective standards. The legislature later changed the legislation to say you can use subjective standards if they were adopted before January 1st, 2020 to apply conditions, so long as they don't make a project infeasible, reduce the density, and so forth. But here's the real fly in this, is that under density bonus law, which I'll talk about next, developers are allowed to obtain waivers of almost all city standards. So even though the city might adopt objective standards, developers can ask to waive them if they have enough affordable housing, and then the city can't apply them anyway. And a project, the way the legislature has adopted the laws, a project that receives waivers is considered to be consistent with your general plan and zoning ordinance. Next slide. Now, the one area that might give the city some discretion is if the project is subject to review under the California Environmental Quality Act. For instance, even if a preliminary application is filed, the city can impose mitigation measures under the California Environmental Quality Act. So that gives the city some ability to look at the environmental consequences and impose some conditions. But the legislature has also adopted many, many more exemptions from the Environmental Quality Act, and in those cases, the city can't do environmental review. And as I said here, the mitigation measures can be imposed if the project's not exempt, but it's much, particularly given the exemptions that were passed as part of the budget trailer bill, it's much easier for projects to get an exemption. Next slide. Okay, so let me talk about density bonuses. Next slide. So a project's eligible for a density bonus if it has as little as 5% very low-income housing. And so once a project is eligible, it's eligible for a density bonus at any level. It's obviously can get a bonus on the density. If the density is 10 units an acre, it can get a bonus of 20 to 100%, depending on how much affordable housing it provides. So it could get either 12 units or maybe up to 20 if it provides enough affordable housing. It can get anywhere from 1 to 7 what are called incentives or concessions. And those are modifications to your local ordinances that reduce the developer's costs. The one that is most prevalent is that a developer can get an unlimited number of waivers of development standards. And that's probably, from a developer's standpoint, the most powerful provision. So it can allow a developer to ignore both the usual zoning standards, like height and setbacks, as well as the objective standards that the city may have passed. And as I mentioned, a density bonus project is considered to be consistent with city standards. If a developer gives you a list and says, I don't want to comply with these 5 things, and I'm requesting a waiver for it, they're considered to be consistent with the city's standards. Next slide. So cities used to have a more restrictive view of waivers, and basically interpreted the language in the density bonus statute to say you're only entitled to a waiver if the city's standard prevents you from getting the density you're entitled to, right? But then there's a case out of San Diego called Bankers Hill 150, and the court in that case, it's an appeal, Court of Appeal decision, so it's published, said a developer is entitled to a waiver for the building as designed unless you can make one of 3 findings. One is that granting the waiver would cause a specific adverse impact, or the waiver violates state or federal law, or it has an adverse effect on a project listed on the California Register. A concession can also be denied if it doesn't result in identifiable and actual cost reductions. But these findings are all very difficult to make. Next slide. And then affordable units required by the city can qualify the city, the project for a density bonus. This was a case out of Napa County, actually, where we defended the county. Latino Unidas v. County of Napa. And so St. Helena requires 20% lower or moderate income units, and all those projects, excuse me, are eligible for a density bonus and waivers and concessions and parking reductions. Next slide. Oh, this was a density bonus project approved in a community. The height limit was actually 3 feet. I mean, sorry, not 3 feet, 3 stories. That would be for snails, maybe. Sorry. The height limit was 3 stories, and you can see here that the height ranges from 4, it actually ranged from 4 to 6 stories. So they were allowed to do that. So by right approval in St. Helena, this goes along with your housing element that Maya talked about, your housing plan. So if a project qualifies for what's called by right approval, there's no review under the California Environmental Quality Act. The city can only look at objective design review standards. You can impose conditions, but the conditions have to be based on objective criteria. And it applies to sites designated in your housing element for lower income housing if the project has 20% lower income units and no subdivisions needed. Next slide. And this is a list of that I got from the city of the by right sites in St. Helena. Next slide. And so the process that St. Helena has set up for by right approval is that the projects are subject only to minor design review. The community development director reviews as part of a building permit application based on objective design standards and zoning standards. And the decision can be appealed to the Planning Commission and can be further appealed from the Planning Commission to the City Council. So that's the by right approval process in St. Helena. Next slide. Okay, so I mentioned that the legislature passed these trailer bills in July that went into effect June 30th. They went into effect immediately. Normally, new legislation goes into effect January 1st. Because these were adopted as part of the budget, they went into effect immediately. So a housing project is exempt from review under the California Environmental Quality Act if the site's not more than 20 acres, it was previously developed with a urban use, or it's 75% surrounded by urban uses. They have a number of other criteria. Basically, if it's near urban uses, it has to be consistent with the general plan and zoning, but remember that includes any waivers that the project's entitled to. It has to have a density of at least 10 units an acre. It does have to meet certain environmental standards. It can't be on ag land, wetlands, certain conservation areas. If it's in a floodplain or in a high fire zone, it has to meet certain standards. And it can't demolish a historic resource that was listed when the preliminary application was filed. Next slide. There's also a tribal notification process, but so that has to be, the tribes have 60 days to respond, and then the consultation has to be completed in 45 to 60 days. But if the project qualifies for this exemption, the city then has to either approve or deny the project within 30 days after the tribal notification is complete. It's possible to get a 90-day, one extension up to 90 days from the developer, but the developer has to agree to that. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience with litigation, HCD, the State Department of Housing Community Development, and the courts. So HCD has what's called a housing accountability unit with at least 25 staff. I think they've expanded it, but they get broader and broader authority. If a developer is unhappy with something that the city tells them about how the city interprets state law, they will run to HCD and see if HCD will send the city a letter of technical advice saying the city is wrong. If the city proceeds to adopt, to do what it was going to do anyway and doesn't obey what HCD told them to do, then they will send out a notice of violation and refer the city to the Attorney General. The AG has a separate 12-person strike force that acts independently. Next slide. So if HCD feels that what the city did is contrary to your housing element, they then have the authority to, quote, decertify or disapprove the city's housing element, and saying the city's the city no longer complies with state law because it didn't do what was in its housing element. And that would subject St. Helena to what's called the builder's remedy, which you may have read about. So any site in the city could be built with a base density of 65 units an acre, and that could be doubled with a density bonus. The project could qualify for the new infill exemption because they adopted a provision this year that says a builder's remedy project is considered to be consistent with the general plan and zoning. There's also a provision that says it has to be approved as proposed by the applicant. That's a pretty harsh penalty. Next slide. Then there's a lot of third-party litigants out there who often sue cities rather than requiring the development to do it. There's the ones that are most active are Californians for Home Ownership, YIMBY, Yes in My Backyard, California Housing Defense Fund. And as I mentioned, they've often joined in and are plaintiffs in litigation related to denials of housing development. We've found that developers' attorneys are getting more and more aggressive, demanding and challenging. Sometimes I'm a little shocked by what they are alleging. Sometimes they're right, but sometimes they've just, and the state has also given them many, many more opportunities to sue cities. Next slide. Okay, so how do the courts view this? Most of the cases have come out of the Los Angeles County Superior Court. There's a few out of the other courts, but not very many. And generally, those decisions are very pro-housing. They generally uphold housing approvals and almost always overturn a denial. And the city risks, if it loses one of these cases, is significant attorney's fees exposure. The developer is entitled to attorney's fees, high defense costs. There's a bill proposed with a fine of $10,000 a unit if a city ignores a letter from HCD or the AG. And cities can rarely appeal from these decisions because there's a provision that says the city must post a bond to appeal. And the bond requirements imposed by the LA courts have been, I know one is $7 million, another is $35 million, and those are too much even for the city of Los Angeles to risk. Next slide. So what can cities do? So first of all, kind of proactive steps. I think it's really important cities look through their health and safety standards and make sure that those are all adopted, sidewalk and bikeway standards, street design, safe routes to school, all the kinds of things that would be health and safety standards, to make sure that projects at least include those. It's possible to designate historic sites and buildings. One of my clients that has a lot of by right projects has standards in the general plan requiring certain studies of environmental issues apart from CEQA. Remember, the California Environmental Quality Act didn't exist always, so cities did review projects without that. And then also contact your legislators. These bills and what the city may or may not be forced to do are not the results of actions taken by your city council. They're actions taken by your legislators. I talked with, I was on a tour and there was a ex-assembly member there, and I was chatting with him about these bills. And he said, when I was assembly member, I hardly ever talked to my constituents. I was mostly contacted by lobbyists, lobbyists and other people at the committee members and so forth. So it's important to contact your legislators. I did notice that when the trailer bills passed, I'm aware of a couple cities where people have got to their legislators and those legislators abstained from voting on it. So that's That's it. And next slide. During project review, if the project's not exempt, review under the California Environmental Quality Act can allow the city to impose feasible mitigation measures. You can enforce health and safety standards in state and federal law, and you can protect historic sites. I'm not quite sure why I put some. I guess if they were already listed, you can protect those sites. But that's about it. And with that, I'm open for questions or just,
Any initial clarifying questions before I open for public comment? Anything that's not entirely clear by a most excellent presentation, Ms. Couts?
thank you.
Mr. Warner?
Excellent. Sorry, excellent presentation, and I don't want to take too much time away from the public. I want everybody to have a chance to talk through it, but Barbara, a couple of questions I have regarding the definition of objective standards and the ability for a local community, notwithstanding everything the state legislature is dictating, to adopt objective standards for public health and safety. And I want to pose a couple of hypotheticals to you on what might be objective standards that might qualify or might not qualify as objective in the areas of water, fire, and traffic, because those are a lot of issues that certainly are of concern up in our area of Napa Valley. So let's say a city adopts a standard that says no more water hookups because we want to conserve all our water. And that's all they do. They just basically say for conservation purposes, no more water hookups. On the other hand, they adopt a water conservation ordinance that basically says you must have no more than X gallons per minute of water for a new hookup because we've evaluated our future water supplies and we've evaluated that we need to conserve them, and based on this empirical evidence of how much water we need to conserve, we're going to limit you. And it just happens that the limit means that anybody who comes in with a residential new home is only going to be able to have one bathroom and only use it once a day. So first, take that hypothetical.
Well,
See, and I think I know the answer to both, but I want you to kind of walk through that
yeah,
hypothetical.
the issue about just holding up water, there's a lot of water law. I'm not an
Right.
expert on water law, but you really have to have evidence to have a water moratorium. That I know. I mean, I think with all these, it really depends on what the evidence is, right?
Right.
Cities are required to have some cities, many counties have to have groundwater management plans, correct?
Right.
So then there's certain groundwater deficient areas. So then, for instance, I know that the county has a limit on how much water each single-family home can use. But with all these, it all depends on what evidence you have.
And I think what you're saying, and I think the same thing would apply to fire. Let's say there's a
Right.
evacuation concern for fire, and a particular housing development, multifamily housing, is rejected based on a standard that says we don't want any more multifamily housing because we can't handle the evacuation. On the other hand, you have an empirical study that shows that the evacuation would be taxed, it would be burdened unless the developer does X, Y, and Z in terms of evacuation. I think, again, what you've said is you have to have empirical evidence. The cities are not foreclosed from adopting empirically verifiable and supportable public health and safety standards that satisfy the objective test, correct?
That's correct. I mean, I'm working with a city that wants to enforce a standard of a sidewalk next to a four-lane
Right.
high-speed road. And there are many, many studies showing that having a sidewalk reduces pedestrian
Right.
vehicle crashes by, what's the number, 65 to 90%. So that kind of, I mean, it seems common sense, but then you
Right.
want something.
And what
to
about
support that.
traffic? Traffic sometimes is not as much viewed as a public health and safety issue, but it is important in terms of quality of life in a community. What about traffic? Have there been any examples of traffic restrictions on new development that basically are considered objective public health and safety standards?
Well, certainly certain standards for, road design and so forth, right turn lanes in, that kind of thing. It's more, the state has gotten rid of level of service
Right.
as a
Right.
whether that could be a health or safety standard, again, you need empirical evidence.
Right. I just want to make that point because I think there's some perception when we talk about the builder's remedy on the Planning Commission, we talk about the state imposing all these new restrictions, the new exemptions from CEQA. It's as if somebody's saying, oh, well, a local community like St. Helena is totally powerless. And I think your point is we're not totally powerless if we come up with genuinely objective public health and safety standards that reflect the community itself in an empirically verifiable way.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Barbara, just one clarifying question on the AB 130 infill exemption. You had mentioned exempt from CEQA unless on ag land. And my question is, ag land in existing use or zoned ag land? You may know that we have a fair amount of ag land in the
Yes.
city.
I think it's defined, I can read you the actual, but it's basically prime agricultural land, land that was, I think there's another category, or land that was designated agriculture by the voters. Anyway, which gets most of the county.
Yes.
But anyway, there's a specific definition of what ag land
All
means.
right, thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Let me open it for public comment, and looking forward to having a good dialogue here with you. I think the general tenor that I'm looking for, and of course, say what you need to say, is really trying to focus on what we are for, what kinds of things that align with our community's values, taking into account these sort of state restrictions and mandates that obviously are somewhat draconian particularly for a rural setting that we have. I think that's the thing that most of us are frustrated at with the state. I believe in government, but I also believe that the one-size-fits-all kinds of approaches to legislation is not always the best, most suitable remedy for towns of our size, particularly those of us who are extremely concerned about fire and evacuation and limited water and sewer supplies. But there are many of us who want to build a full spectrum community, and we realize our workers need a place to live. So you have these competing policies, and hopefully we can have a civil dialogue about that, and maybe have some ideas. Again, Mr. Rosa encouraged us not to get into a specific project. We can still ask questions, of course, but we're not here to, it's not agendized to talk about a specific project, but certainly sort of the general themes of concern are most welcome at this point. So please go to the podium and give your comment. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Marston, live at 1615 Scott Street,
Welcome. Nice to see you up and at 'em.
and we moved into town after our property at the end of White Sulphur Springs was destroyed, our family compound, the 400 acres of forest, and not the vineyard. And I'm working with Bill Dodd and Terrence of the Napa Valley Community Foundation to see if we can figure out a way to keep Sunshine Market from going out of state, which they don't want to do, but they feel they have to do by the end of next year. And one of the thoughts was worker housing, as was mentioned here, that there's could be an opportunity. You've probably covered this, but the idea of donating some city land to build housing for local employees, and pick a number, 50 units of housing on one of the many sites you own that could be rapidly and positively meeting good standards, housing, like donating it by the end of this year and getting under construction next year. I think that would be a very good sign for the owner, Jay Smith of Sunshine, who wants to stay here, but is besieged with problems. And specifically, I'd like to recommend a site with 50 units for local employee housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Nice to
I'm
see you.
Linda Reef. I live at 1944 Spring Street. I want to say a huge thank you to the city for this education session. It's a direct follow-up to the conversations and meetings last spring when the neighbors were shocked to find out about the upzoning of 1933 Spring Street. I live across the street. And while I know that this meeting is not about that, I do view this as a follow-up. And again, I acknowledge and thank you for doing this education session. I also respectfully request another follow-up meeting, and that is to close the loop with the 120 homeowners who would be directly impacted by a project there on whatever happened with the examination of alternative sites. This was a part of the motion of the eventual approval of the upzoning. Looking at alternative sites and then the conversations with the state. There were going to be meetings with the state. And while I have found out by contacting the city manager and the planning director, thank you for answering questions on the phone, I do think there should be a proper public disclosure and closing the loop of what happened with those meetings. And then secondly, pursuant to tonight's discussion, I really liked your line of thinking. Chairman Warner, thank you. I was wondering the same thing. I'd love to know what are our current objective standards, health and safety standards. I'd also like to look at the inventory of historic resources. As you may recall, one of the ironies that Mr. Quaglia and I both pointed out in the hearings last year, his home at 1933 Spring Street and my home across the street were put on you put them on the historic resource list. And that project would directly affect the home on the property as well as mine across the street. And then lastly, on the fire issue, many of us lost our insurance this past year because we are deemed in a fire zone. So I'm very interested in further examination of that as well. So again, thank you, and I look forward to the next meetings to learn more.
Thank you for your comments.
Good evening, Commission and Council. My name is Joe McGrath. I've done some development in town, and I'm also a board member for our town, St. Helena, although tonight I'm speaking in a strictly private capacity. I've made this point to this council and probably Commission and several times before, and also an opinion piece in the St. Helena Star. And it's sort of been under the notion that, quote, all housing is not necessarily good housing. And so I'm going to keep making this point until we as a community sort of start working with our legislators to make them sort of more responsive to, I think, sort of the unique circumstances with this specific community and others like it that are highly desirable second home and vacation home communities. And it really comes down to the RHNA targets on above market housing. It's sort of ironic to place a goal on the market, and the legislature has actually done that. And I think the effect of that is that it sort of gives by right cover to projects in this community that, as you can see, Spring Grove or Hunter projects are predominantly above market. And we're in a community now that I think, that I know the number's north of 50%, but I think I hear it's closing on 60% second home or vacation homes in the community. And so basically it's ripe for exploitation by developers to build a product that is just adding, even if it's half second homes to the community and utilizing finite resources that could be better used for, that serve community needs. And so I'm going to keep making this point until maybe maybe our people in Sacramento actually do something about it. And there's probably a really easy fix, which is define above market and cap it. 200% AMI, 300% AMI, something that creates a product that's actually for the community that serves. And we're not alone. Hillsburg, Carmel, other cities like us that are desirable second home communities have the same problem. So that's the only point I'm going to make tonight. Hopefully we can move forward and do something in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGrath. Others wishing to approach and talk to your commission and council.
Hi, Rich Corsetti, 1401 Spring Street. So I'm not against, housing in the city at all. I'm for it. And I hope, say, for instance, the Railroad Avenue project becomes housing eventually. But I think I also have a concern about how we got to the point at basically where the Spring Grove project is, where it has been, say, 2 or 3 housing units there in the past, and now it's going to be 41 units, which is the minimum that the state's requiring, apparently, under the new state law. And it just seems, I guess I question, and I wonder still, and I don't remember exactly how it came down, that project or that site, those sites became high-density housing. I think that by making it high-density housing, it put City of St. Helena into a tricky spot there, because then I think the state grabs onto that and says, okay, well, now you've got to do a minimum number of housing units. And I wish there was some way that we could have found a way to reduce the number of housing units for that site, because of a lot of the issues we're talking about in terms of fire hazard, fire evacuation, parking, traffic, water, all these issues come up. It just seems like there's some way a compromise could have been reached there. And the other thing is that the City of St. Helena, to me, it should have teamed up with the county, the city and the county of Napa, to find a way to reach the number of housing units for the county in total, where we could do our share, but we don't be forced into a situation where we have to take a certain location and jam in 41 housing units. I did a survey. I went on Nextdoor a few months ago, and I reached out to the community and said, what's going on with this project? Because I'd gone to a number of the preliminary meetings, and 90% of the responses back were from people in the area, said, we really hate this project going forward. I got one comment or two that said, well, you're just a NIMBY. And I said, no, it's not that. But really, realistically, and the slide just identified it, these are not low-income housing units that are going to be built. So as the last speaker just said, a lot of this could end up being people who have it as a secondary home from their other home somewhere else in the Bay Area. So I don't know if that really serves the interest of worker housing that we are, generally speaking, trying to create here. So I don't know, there's a lot of things. I just wish there was more discussion about this. I wish there were alternate designs, because I don't think it's a great looking design. And I hope this is not the end of it. It seems like it may be the way things are going right now, but I hope there are some chances to re-look at this project and some alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corsetti.
I'm Bonnie Schock. I'm also on the board of our town, but I'm speaking as an individual. I think one of the things that was brought up tonight is the city owns land that you're going to be selling, and you should sell it to people that are only going to do affordable housing. I don't think we should do mixed use. If the city owns the land, you can choose who you're going to partner with. And I think one of the ways to avoid some of these minor amount of affordable and the rest full units by you being the one that sells the property to people like our town that care about not just Sunshine, but every other business in this community that's closing its doors because it can't find staff. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Others? Mr. Keneally, nice to see you.
Hi there. I believe that St. Helena and its government and its citizens need to see what we can do now so that we can control future density increases in our city. I moved here to move to a small rural town and am concerned about what I see as a creeping suburbanization of our city. Decades ago, voters in this valley passed the Ag Preserve, and it prevented the valley from being paved over for maybe being a Sacramento, maybe being a San Mateo in another valley not far from here. I think that St. Helena's planning department and city government and city council was insufficiently aware of all this legislation coming out of Sacramento, and certainly its citizens don't seem to have been aware of that legislation and how it could threaten the small town feel. I believe the upzoning of various parcels was done without sufficient public comment. I've got 3 suggestions for us to think about tonight to be constructive. I suggest that the city government get involved in Sacramento, where these regulations are coming from, and join a growing movement in this state where cities are asserting their rights against oppressive housing regulations coming out of Sacramento. I suggest that we have a strategic goal for the city council to define a little bit more tightly the small town feel that we all talk about and to protect it for generations in the future. Finally, I suggest that we redouble our communications efforts with the community so that things like upzoning and general plan changes don't come as a surprise to the vast general public and end up in a position where projects get too far along before the community gets involved, and we end up creating tension around a general housing need that we agree on that seems to be getting mixed up in bad location choices.
Thank you. I noticed that was a mild clapping. I'll be okay with that, but yeah, we don't clap.
We don't clap.
We don't clap.
Apologies.
There's no joy in this room.
Well, there is when good points are made. There could be joy.
Speak for yourself.
That is a joke. Go ahead,
Yeah.
ma'am.
There could be joy.
Welcome.
There could be. Thank you very much. My name is Tamara Sorensen. I am at 1381 St. James Drive. And
Say your name again.
Tamara Sorensen.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make a few short comments. One, I want to piggyback off of the gentleman who just sat down with regard to his 3 final points. I think the first one that he said that the council should get involved with our state legislature. I could not expound on that more. Leads me to a point that I wanted to bring to your attention. I don't know if you know this. I would hope that you do. But the state's RHNA numbers, as of a few years ago, were and are overinflated and overstated. And I have a document from the California State Auditor that shows that to be the case. Was that something that was known to anyone? No? So with that said, and looked into, why would the city of St. Helena not request, after finding out that this audit, these RHNA numbers are inflated by somewhere about 30%, say, look, if these numbers are inflated, we need to adjust our RHNA numbers, number one. Makes sense. I wanted to also piggyback on the chairman's comment about objective standards, and those were very succinct scenarios. They were very good. I would add the question of the traffic issue in evacuations, being as obviously we are in such, a state of fire preparedness and really wanting to look around corners and find ways to preserve life in these types of emergency situations. So when the evaluations were done, my question is, was it done in a sort of myopic or a siloed sense where St. Helena itself was looked at in and of itself for evacuation for these projects, or was it actually an accumulative type of report or investigation if, God forbid, there were a devastating fire that started that encompassed the lower valley, mid, and upper? Because when you're looking at, say, Yountville, St. Helena, Calistoga, there's only 2 ways in and 2 ways out. And they're 2-lane roads. You got Silverado Trail and you've got 29. And that's between these, what is it? It's, correct me if I'm wrong, 8 miles Yountville to St. Helena, another 8, so that's 16 miles of 2-lane roads if you can't get out. So my question is, just what's the criteria for these objective standards? The third point I would like to make is all of this should very well be transparent. We are the citizens that pay the taxes. We pay everyone's salaries. When we ask for transparency, we should get it. You're all doing your jobs. You're doing what the state is telling you to do. But we are asking and imploring that you question what the state is asking you to do within the auspices of how we can do that. So I look forward to hearing about some additional meetings like this, as the lady in black had asked about specifics. So I want to thank you all very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you for your comment.
Hi, Jeff Farmer, 1533 Tainter Street. Mayor Doring, you asked in the beginning, you wanted to know what we want for St. Helena. And one of the things I would like to see is a decrease in the number of second homes. The community is hollowed out. Since I've lived here 25 years, there are at least 4 houses around my area that have gone empty. The community is getting empty. So I look at the new housing opportunities, however they are implemented, whether they're low income, middle, high, whatever. Is there a way legally or financially, incentively, to require that they be sold to people who actually live here rather than second and other kinds of homes? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Others? Welcome.
Katie Lazar, 1563 Spring Street. I believe that this situation is like a 911. The city of St. Helena appears to be dying, and we all need to stand up, and I'm asking you to stand up and do some of the things on a daily basis that will turn that around. I was looking at Zillow today, and there are 101 listings for St. Helena, up from 88 a couple of weeks ago. I don't understand, why there are so many houses for sale, except it does not bode well. And if you look at the numbers, most of those are over $1 million, and that are in the Spring Grove category of $1.3 million. So if 101 homes here are for sale, and most of those are in that category, what's going to happen when that gets built? We too have second homers next to us, one on each side. And it's lonely. It's really, it's very lonely. You have no one to go ask for sugar or to do any of the normal things that neighbors do. I know, sounds kind of crazy, right? But you don't have that. We don't have anyone to talk to about what's happening on our lot lines. And all I'm saying is I would like you to make sure that every day you get up and ask yourself, what can I do about the problems that we have here? And how can we create a better St. Helena that welcomes everyone here and accommodates everyone here, and we don't end up with a bunch of unoccupied homes. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Beth Novak from 1256 Hudson Avenue. Sorry, I'm not the best dressed tonight. I walked here. So, no, I just want to say one thing, and I think a lot of the reasons, and Paul, you and I have spoken about this, is I believe that the culture of this town, which my family has lived in since 1972, that doesn't give me anything more or less than anybody else. It just says that I care about this community as much as everybody else does. I think that the culture of our town needs to be around transparency. It's been brought up, but honestly, the main thing about sort of this up zoning and everything that I've heard is that these things happened and shouldn't have. And I'm speaking specifically to the Quaglia property that is an old historic vineyard. You know, once you rip out an old historic vineyard, it's not coming back. And we're rehabilitating right now the Rossi Vineyard. Thankfully, the man that bought that property, although he's building a relatively large home, he wanted to rehabilitate that vineyard, and we've been fortunate to have been asked to jump in and do that. That Quaglia property, as an example, in our agricultural community, that upzoning should never have happened without proper community input, and that does not sit well. It doesn't anywhere. And so if there is, you know, I know, Paul, you're asking for not people to clap and not express how they feel and not express their agreement. And I understand, because you have to keep a meeting in order, so don't get me wrong. But I just really think that it is so important in a town like ours, if we want to retain whatever we all have a belief around St. Helena to be, that we are transparent, that the city communicates, that it is open, that it does not make decisions that are not part of the public discourse, and that people are a part of it, because those types of resentments build when things like that happen, and people don't feel good about it, and it makes it difficult to have, you know, it becomes kind of us against them. We should be a we, and we need to be a we now more than ever. We should be working together to do what's best for our city, which is the city of St. Helena. And that is all I wish to say. I don't have anything very specific. I love many of the things tonight that have been said. I started one of the clapping, so forgive me. But I just really, that should be our culture. That should be who we are. We are the city of St. Helena. We are a community. We should come together and talk about these things and be open. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Chris Howell, 1563 Spring Street. I certainly appreciated the presentation today, and I just want to say that it's obvious that the state regulations, as they're currently interpreted and applied, are not working to the interests of our city. The question is how we got there, and obviously I appreciated learning from Councillor Couts what could be done, or what we could have done that we have not done. That's worth discussing. But I also was very interested in hearing about the possibility, at least, that the RENA assessment for the city of St. Helena may be out of line. I think that's extremely interesting. And it might be possible that some of these regulations, as they're currently applied, do not actually affect the purpose that was defined in the legislation that enabled the regulation. And there's a possibility, not saying this small town should be dealing with it, that some of those regulations could be challenged even while upholding the law as it was enacted.
Thank you.
Let's see. Wayne Leong, 1145 Crane Avenue. I have a really simple question, and it relates to the high-density developments, where it's you have to abide by the minimum density of 16 units per acre. Then it comes down to simple equation, density, and then the area. From all the questions I'll go back to the Magnolia Oaks development, which I was involved with. And in that particular development, it's 5.8 acres, and they applied the minimum density to that, which was 16, that would be 93 units behind the Alameda Hotel next to the neighborhood. But the developer and the city agreed not to use the gross area, but to use the net area. So the question I have to our consultant is that, is there a state mandate that says that in computing the number of units, do you have to use the gross area of a lot to determine what the total number of units should be? If you had a lot of which there was a creek running through it, there was an easement which you couldn't build on, why should you take the entire area of that lot to compute the number of units that you have to build? is there a definition or a mandate in the state that says you have to use the gross area of a lot if that lot is going to be divided into streets, maybe parks, easements? Where in the state says that the gross area applies to that? Is that I'm speaking to a...
Well, Mr. Leong, wait a minute, Mr. Leong. I think they're writing down the questions. We're not going to go back and forth, but they're going to be able to have some dialogue after you're finished.
Oh, so they'll
Yeah.
answer the question?
To the extent that they can, so yes. We're not going to go back and forth. You're speaking to the council and commission right now, so thank you. And they're listening to your questions.
Okay, oh, so
Yeah.
they'll come back and they'll answer all the questions that...
They'll answer as many as they can, time permitting.
Okay.
You've been consistent with that point. You've made that point to me very forcefully, so thank you for that.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Others wishing to address your council? Yeah.
Good evening. Rob Finucci, 831 Charter Oak Avenue. And I really came here without any comments or suggestions or questions, but I find myself here at the podium. I guess what I'm had a question or maybe a comment, I guess, is, having, I guess high density and affordable housing coexist with, agricultural properties and vineyards and walnut orchards and things of that nature, that I'd hate to see all the vineyards and all of the agricultural land within the city limits developed. And at the same time, I'm in favor of affordable housing, and having been on Napa Family Homes Board and helped with the Stonebridge and Hunt Street over the years with Father Brinkle. So I just hope that there's ability to have these agricultural and housing coexist together in this town. And, once you do lose, vineyard or old vines, they'll be forever lost. And so I'm also, not really versed in all the new laws and regulations. So I heard the 20-acre agricultural exemption, but has to be over. It can't. The exemption of some sort from CEQA, I guess, has to be over 20 acres. Anything 20 acres or less. That's a lot of acres in this town, 20 acres of agricultural land. And hopefully some of these parcels of agricultural land can be protected. I'm also not clear on how agricultural land that's in the urban reserve is treated. If, let's say, someone purchases a property that's been in agriculture, and just about everything is agriculture unless it's been developed at some point in the past. Because if it wasn't vineyards, it was walnuts or it was cows. Since the beginning of time, there was no housing, so I'm not sure how that plays into the mix. And if somebody buys something that's in the urban reserve, but it's been in agriculture for generations and generations, whether or not the city is under state law that they must allow a developer or a builder to be able to rezone that property from, let's say, urban reserve to some type of housing development, and whether or not is the city, does the city, and probably not a very smart question, probably everybody knows the answer to this, but if you do have a property that's zoned agriculture, is the city under some obligation to rezone it if somebody buys that property that's zoned agriculture to a higher density? I know that the city can do it, but I'm just wondering if a developer that, we're talking about a property, let's say it's less than 20 acres, that's in agriculture and it's purchased, whether or not the state would require the city to rezone if that's what the purchaser or developer intended to do. So like I said, I don't have recommendations, or comments really, I just have a lot of questions. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation, by the way. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finucci.
Good evening. My name is Joshua Park. I have some questions around the potentiality of building on parcels and how it's designated. So I know upzoning on Spring was a huge issue. What I don't understand is why the City Council hasn't developed a more mission-forward perspective on what's happening with development in the city. Everyone is understandably concerned about ag and development of vineyard. Frankly, they should be furious that there's not more specific conversation around protecting it, and why staff isn't using zoning as the singular, this is an opinion, but the singular most effective tool that an ag community like this has to protect the land that is here, that makes the place what it is and is so desirable. Because you start letting that go, market forces, there's any number of things that can in any moment create issues around people wanting to hold those parcels. And if we don't have, as a community, some kind of goal and objective to maintain the beauty of space around us while being mission forward for developing affordable housing, they don't have to be one or the other. But you really need to talk about it and give staff direction. You know, they're doing their jobs the best way that they can, with lots of information from the state being fired at them, but they're also not getting anything from you saying, hey staff, how can we think creatively about this? Can we divide up our allocation to multiple lots instead of easily upzoning singular parcels? There's better ways to do it. It'd be nice to have some conversation around it. So can we start talking about that as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Park. Good comment. All right. Going. I see
Sorry.
you. No worries. I saw you approach.
Brian Sandoli, Spring
Welcome.
Street. We're in the heart of all the upzoning. I want to thank you all very much for the time. Ever since we got blindsided last year, this is one of the last formal meetings that we were a part of, and we're very grateful, so thank you. One thing we wanted to clarify, we heard last year that in this upzoning and the delineation of the map, that it was state-driven, that it was between east side and west side. We learned that here. I found out from a dear confidant, an attorney in Sacramento, and a local representative that that was not the case. So maybe I want to ask Barbara as well, if a zone in a city is designated as affordable housing, does the state come in, which we were told here, draws a line and says it has to be so much here and so much here within that grid? Really just would love that direction, because it's kind of confusing the information that we're getting. Hence why what's being developed where. Mr. Warren brought up a great example last year of areas that are more affordable to buy instead of some of the most expensive areas. And then going back to another one of, even when you do build them, they could be empty because the people just can't afford them. And then we'd love to know the final answer is what technically is affordable housing. When a unit does go in, what are the qualifications? And how much does it cost in order to live there? So just some simple questions. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let me bring it back to the council. I don't know. Of course. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Sherry Watterson. I'm from 1706 Spring Street. And just a quick question. There was a great comment about there's other small towns like ours that are experiencing the same issues, like Healdsburg, like Carmel. I'm sure there's many others. Is there a coalition, or should there be, of towns like ours that are facing the same challenges so that we can collaborate and think creatively about solutions? Thanks.
Thank you. That was indeed brief. Appreciate that. All right, anybody else wishing to speak? Okay, I'm going to close the public comment and bring it back. Mr. Rosa, would you wish to have some brief comments following up? I don't know if we can answer every single question tonight. I don't expect you to. A lot of this will be brought back. A lot of wonderful comments, and I commend the public for being well-informed and bringing these issues up in a civil way. By the way, this whole thing about clapping, it's not that I'm against clapping. So what happens, it's just a natural thing. So there's the other side, the clapping is booing, and then you have people who may be intimidated to speak. And I just want to make sure that everybody feels like they can say their piece here without, that stress of either booing or clapping. And so that's the reason I do that, because it's to serve you. All right. All right. Well done. Mr. Rosa.
Thank you. And thank you all for, this is a great turnout, and that we would fill the room, because, again, I wanted to have, and actually this speaks to what I wanted to talk about was the following up on the conversation of transparency, particularly post that April 2nd meeting last year at the Planning Commission, where we took the required upzonings that many of the, again, seeking my planning commissioners here that were at that meeting. And I was just recollecting on, next cycle, things that there's always things in a process that you can do differently, right, in terms of, but I actually made some notes that probably went unbeknownst to anyone that was reading the paper or following, publications, but there were, so we created a focus group for the housing element, just like to get input on where should we be developing these sites and telling HCD these are opportunity sites. And so there were 4 focus group meetings. There were 3 public workshops, 3 study sessions, and then that doesn't even include a host of joint meetings with the Planning Commission and the Council before the formal public hearings to say, this is what we think we're going to be doing as like our primary housing sites. And I think sometimes like a general plan update, I can tell you from other cities where I've been the resident and they say, oh, we're doing updating a general plan. I was like, wow, I wonder how many people really know this is very important to pay attention, because to Joshua Park's comment about, why isn't the city, hey, this is a vineyard area, why isn't staff protecting it? But really the time for the community to get involved in those conversations is actually when we were in the throes of that 10-year general plan update and everything was on the table. Here's the map. What is currently ag and what should stay ag? And, Hunter, this site 10, these have been zoned and had a general plan designation since the 1990s for residential. So I'm sure there wasn't the same kind of community engagement in the 90s as we have now. But so once we've kind of created, this is showing our blueprint, and the whole community and the council blessing, saying, okay, this is our blueprint of how as a community we've decided we're going to grow and where we are, and what sites, and yes, it's really hard to get the community to come and participate and understand how actually that can really affect the view out your window. So there's certainly ways that we can next round, really try and shake the tree and do more newsletters and try and tell people don't just assume it's like another policy meeting that's not going to affect you, because these are, just the record shows. And I would encourage you to go back and look at the PowerPoint that we have on the agenda page for April 2nd, because in that slide deck, we probably have multiple slides that I was just trying to take these notes from of the community outreach and the input we did. Now, I know the actual upzonings did not get notified of the 300 feet until right when we were actually getting ready to take that. But the precursor of saying we're looking at all these sites had actually been in the works for 3 years. So now I think we got some great comment of, what can we do as a community going forward. I was not aware of the overzealous work on saying this is really what the RHNA was, so we can definitely follow up and explore more into that. But those are just I know there's a number of comments related to more of the legal questions in the state laws, so I'll let Barbara come up and speak to those.
Thank you, Mr. Rosa.
So let me know if I've forgotten any question. One is, can the RENA be changed now? And the answer is no, not until the next cycle comes around in 2031. There's, unless the state changes the law, there's not any mechanism to do it. It's quite, basically statewide, it's really much too high. The RENAs for all the communities in the state would require about 300,000 units a year be developed, and the state recently hasn't gotten anything above 125,000. So those numbers are just not going to be accomplished, but nonetheless, there's not a way to change the city's RENA right now. And in terms of the net v gross density, so if you're looking at minimum density of, let's say, 15 or 16 units an acre, there's nothing specified in state law about how that's calculated. And our clients do it depending on how their zoning ordinance is written. So there's no requirement. There is an issue when you have a density bonus project that, so the state says that they're entitled for the what's called the base density, the density you're entitled to without a density bonus. The state says you have to include the gross area of the site. So that allows the number to be much higher. But in terms of the city's minimum density requirements, there's no state law about that. So the city can choose to do it off net density or gross density. One thing you do have to be careful about, though, is meeting the number that's in your housing element. There is some number of units that were projected in the housing element. And if you go below that, you need to show that you still have enough sites to accommodate your RENA. There's no obligation to rezone agricultural land. There was a question about why the state was demanding that there be more sites on the west side of town. I don't really know the details, but the state's has been very insistent that that the lower income sites be located in higher income areas. Cities have to do an analysis of whether the lower incomes, how the incomes in the site in the city are what?
Equitable.
Are equitable, right? It's one part of town, the low-income part of town, and then you put all the low-income units there. I don't know any part of St. Helena that's low-income, but anyway, they felt that the west side of town, as I understand it, was higher opportunity, and so we're pushing to have more units in the west side of town. Maya can probably answer that better than I can. And there was a question about what's affordable housing. I didn't do the numbers, but I did look up what low income is considered in Napa County, which is kind of shocking. So a single person is considered low income if their income doesn't exceed $90,000 a year. And a family of four is considered low income if their income doesn't exceed $128,000 a year. And a moderate income single person can have an income of up to $123,000 a year. And a family of four is considered to be moderate income if their income doesn't exceed $176,000 a year. It varies from county to county. It's obviously much lower in Mono County, but the number, we're not really talking about poor people here. So I think those are the only questions I had.
All right. We're going to bring it back to the council and the commission at this juncture. Ms. Cobell, sure. Make your comments, ask questions. We're probably going to only go for another 15 minutes because others have some commitments, but go ahead. You have the floor.
I have a lot of things going on in my head right now. But there was one slide, Barbara, that you had skipped one bullet point, and it was about that single-family housing. It was about the 5 meetings cap, and there's the last bullet point that says applies to single-family homes. Is that 5-minute meeting cap just for, does the single-family homes only apply to the 5 meeting cap, or is this also just housing element, all single? Sorry.
Anything that's defined as a housing development project has the 5-meeting limit. So, you could have, one of my clients has a project with 1,700 units, and that's subject to the 5-meeting limit as well as a single-family home.
Are the rest of the items applying to single-family homes, or?
They have 2 different definitions of what a housing project is, and some of it applies to single-family homes and some of it doesn't. The findings that I was reading near the beginning to deny a project, those don't apply to a single-family home. But you have to look at each bit of legislation and see which definition they're applying.
All right. Do you have other comments, Ms. Covell?
I do, but I'd love to hear.
I'd like to have other people speak, but
Yeah.
go ahead, make a few more comments, Ms. Covell. You had a couple questions, but
I just wanted to thank everybody for all their comments. I took notes, so I'm new to the board. Today is actually my first day on the Planning Commission. So, however, I have about 20 years of, I'm a licensed architect, and I've worked on San Francisco, and I've worked in this town for the past 10 years. So, and I think my overall take, and I apologize because I am new, I just see, so the presentation was really helpful, and I would love to know your personal thoughts, because you did a little preface and said that you wouldn't want to explain those, and you would just focus on just what the the laws say. For me, the presentation was helpful, but it was also kind of like scary, I guess, for lack of a better word. Just kind of with all the, lawsuits, potentially things that you can't do as a government, as a local government, it kind of just scares everybody in town. But I'm also hearing from everybody in the community. I wrote a lot of notes, and I think a lot of people would say that, like Jeff Farmer said, the town is dying. There's a lot of second homes. They're lonely. There's a need for workforce housing. There is a need for diversity, for everybody to live here. Somebody else said everybody to live here. I'm also hearing like the emergency situations, like evacuations. I think it was Sorensen who said, have studies been done where it's like a cumulative exit. For instance, in buildings that are a larger size with like 49 occupants or less, you only need 1 exit out the front door. But with buildings that have more occupants, you need to have 2 exits. So, for like a town, and looking at the larger valley, and exiting and accumulating cars, I think that was a really important message. And I think when it was, I want to say the 2017 fires, Atlas Peak, when we were all driving and fleeing and trying to get gas, there were backups. And I think it's really important to look at all the neighborhoods coming down and through the exits. And I actually think there was a report done that looked at cities that way, and I think Napa Valley was like one of the worst locations for exiting as a whole. So to your comment about exiting, I think that is an important issue. I think what I'm gathering is that I find this like a really large math problem with a lot of variables. And the variables can range from like the emergency, bringing families up here, affordable housing, finding the right balance, protecting and preserving what we have that's special in this town, and creating a thriving town that's not dying, and also creating transparency and getting community input, and making sure everybody feels good about the decisions that are made and that they make total sense in the bigger picture and not just in a zoomed in site. So, I mean, what I was gathering from a lot of the stuff, and I still have more questions, but I guess on a positive of all of this is that today's meeting, I feel like by hearing everybody and understanding what the rules say, I do this all the time with building codes. The thing about codes is that they're made really general. So I don't know how to say that better, but codes have to apply to everybody, and then there are like variances for when certain situations don't allow for certain like it's a hardship or something like that. And as a person that I've done projects, I do talk to the city, the authority having jurisdiction about like some of these laws, because from what I'm hearing from everybody here is that you guys want us to talk to Sacramento and push back on some of these things, because our town is not the same town as every other town out there. However, the laws get applied kind of like this, right? And so I think that is an important note. And I think from what I'm getting today is that what's exciting is that there's a lot of smart people here, and somebody else brought up that we're in a dire situation of kind of survival. I think somebody said that, and there are a lot of empty stores. There are a lot of empty houses. It's hard to get employees. I have a business here. My employees don't live here because it's too expensive. So. There are a lot of challenges that we're facing right now. It's not the same challenges as 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So we do have to be creative. And I think as a community, I really like the idea of like fostering more community input, and looking at the situation as a whole, because it's not just one project as a piece, but it's a master planning project that is not just St. Helena, but also the Valley. So zooming out and zooming in. And then I do want to say a couple of other points.
Ms. Covell, you realize we have a lot of other folks who want to
sorry.
speak also. We have limited time, but please, I'm not stopping you. I just maybe summarize and finish up. Any questions we can always submit later, but I want to give others a chance to
I think I just
comment
wanted
as
to kind of talk about something Mr. Rosa mentioned was about the general plan, and I think it was kind of commenting on when stakeholders were having all these meetings and stuff like that. I think to some of the points that I think some of those meetings were happening during COVID. I don't know. I kind of remember there were a lot of meetings happening during then, and it was really hard for people to actually get out and participate in some of these meetings. And then I think the transparency that I'm hearing is that when people do speak, that it's just having the ability to acknowledge all of the comments, not just some of the comments. So.
others wishing to weigh in, give some direction. Ms. Furtick.
Yes, thank you. And Thank you to everyone who commented. I thought this was a really constructive meeting. I guess one of my follow-up questions is, and I was not on the Planning Commission when we did go through the updated codes, and so when it comes to objective standards, how do we now go back and determine whether we've done a great job of establishing, and I see you smiling, and, done a great job of establishing objective standards. And again, maybe we've done that with code updates. I don't know, again, because I wasn't a part of that. And maybe Chair Warner can speak to that.
And that's a great question, because I think in the Planning Commission, we've already talked about having an updated kind of review of how are we doing under the zoning code. And we've talked about that in the Planning Commission, and that's certainly something I support, that we periodically have a public opportunity for all of us on the Planning Commission and the public to say, okay, for what we've been doing with the new zoning code update, how is it working? Because one goal, and the City Council was very specific in this when it adopted the zoning code update, was to streamline the process and to make it more transparent. And I think what we're hearing, and your question is a great one, is we need to periodically do that and offer an opportunity to update because things change. So I think that's something that it's not a legal question, it's just a good common sense point. And I think we should do that.
And if there are any other best practices in that area, especially given what we know now, in terms of establishing those as a way to, better define, it's one of the few tools we have, to better define the types of development that we want. So if there are best practices that we can follow, as a guide, I'd love to know what they are.
And I think that's certainly something that, the City Council, as our policy makers, advise us on what the overall policies and best practices should be, but we also have a planning staff and ourselves who are kind of seeing the real cases as they come in front of us, and gives us an opportunity to kind of develop an inventory of here's a best practice based on our experience with actual cases. And I agree. I think that's a great opportunity to do that.
And probably following all the litigation that's going on is the standard.
Other comments, Ms. Frederick? Any others from the council wishing to opine, weigh in, give direction? We'll have to talk about direction, but Vice Mayor Deasy, of course.
Thank you. Thank you for all the presentation, all the comments. I'll be very quick. I just wanted to say that I heard the call to get more involved at the state level, so thank you for that. And I was kind of particularly inspired by a couple of the comments, I think by Mr. Farmer and Mr. Park, which I took to be, how can we be proactive about setting the stage for what we want the community to look like. How can we attract residents? I think it can be hard to deal with the laws and be restrictive on second home ownerships, but what can we do to be proactive? I'd love to further explore that. Thank you.
Others? Mr. Lopez, of course.
So, sorry, I had a brief moment that I had to leave, and I apologize. Everything was super important, but nature. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out, and I'm a carpenter by trade, and I look at things simply, and I was born and raised here. My parents are all buried here, so I'm not planning on leaving, but it has changed tremendously. What I'd like to see, it's obviously our house is not in order, and I'll tell you why. We see second homes. We don't see enough for people to work and live here. But I'd like to see some statistics, because as a carpenter, if my roof's leaking, I'm going to fix that first, right, before my walls, or else you lose the whole structure, right? And I'd like to see what the need based is. Like, we all love our town, but it's obvious that we sometimes can't get positions filled here for the city or our agriculture. And I know the agriculture we can't keep up because there's just too much of it, and they come in every morning. As I'm driving to work, I see just loads of people. But we got to be realistic on, and maybe find a way as a community to figure out how to fill those with the workers we need to keep Sunshine open, to keep the workers going. Because as I sat here for the past year, and like I said, I look forward to trying to serve our community the best we can. We got to see what we need to keep this town alive and working. And you're right. I mean, I have plenty of people I don't see, neighbors I don't see, I can't borrow sugar from, or they can't borrow it from me. But I'd like to see more statistics on what the need is and how we can fulfill running our city. And there's other issues as well that we try to tackle. And you know, the council's doing a great time with tackling with just being able to pay the bills and keep the roads going and going. And there's a lot of infrastructure, but I think that's very important, and that we see the true scope, that even if we limit housing, or because they're all going to second homes, what is the actual need right now to keep our city running? Because I think that's our main concern.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. Others?
You know, I just want to make one other observation, and it might not be very popular. And that is that I hear some kind of conflicting views, like water and traffic, and are an issue unless it's affordable housing. So it's an issue if they're second homes, but it's not an issue if it's affordable and workforce housing. So I think we need to come to terms with that. I think we recognize that we do need more affordable and workforce housing, but I think we need to be conscientious about not just raising the flag of there's too much traffic, there's not enough water, because we'll accept more traffic and more, that we're going to use more water if it's workforce housing or if it's affordable housing. So I think that's the only thing I would say I think we need to be conscientious about, and not use those as blanket excuses, because we will accept them for the right kind of housing. I think we just, want to achieve more of the right kind of housing in our community. So, let's just, again, be conscientious about not just raising those flags for everything. So that's my only other observation.
Ms. Cabell.
So to piggyback on Hector and Sue on the traffic situation, I'm asking Barbara, is there any sort of state legislation on supporting public transportation and getting more public transportation to ease traffic and get more people to move around? Because I think a lot of the issues that we're dealing with housing affordability is due to lack of really old, poor city design, where suburban sprawl and roads and this whole American dream thing about driving your car to work, that created this grid and gridlock. So is there state government help on public transportation to help ease such cities like in Europe or Brazil, where they promote more public transportation and you can get to work and help us there? Because I think we're struggling with housing because of decisions made in the past with poor city planning.
I might just mention, I'm not sure Barbara needs to mention, but we have absolutely a county agency, the Napa Valley Transportation Agency, that actually does comprehensive strategic planning for mass transit needs up and down the valley. And their website has got great resources and references in terms of their sources of funding, quite a bit of federal funding. Some of it's going away, I guess, but state funding as well, gas tax funding, very much a holistic approach, as I understand it, in terms of county transportation needs and planning. So yes, indeed, there is funding for trying to incent and emphasize mass transit up valley.
All right. We've come to the end because there's another meeting following this meeting, Planning Commission. What I would say is there's a lot of grist here. There's a lot of opportunity, and I think the general import that I'm seeing, Mr. Rosa, is the opportunities that were mentioned in the slide deck and the presentation by Barbara seem to be areas where we may want to bring those back, maybe with the Planning Commission, and start trying to convert some of those opportunities into action plans as we look more carefully at the objective standards, defining, for example, when there was a mention of, what is sufficient fire evacuation, for example, and maybe we have that, and a couple of these other things where we start being mission forward. I think there's some, even defining compatibility, that's always been difficult for me. I served on a planning commission before, and it is always challenging, and that will be a challenging definition to make that objective in our community. But there seems to be a lot of areas, what is adequate or inadequate water, fire evacuation, as I mentioned. There may be opportunities for us to revisit the code, and really it's by experience to see how we're doing, but it's, I think that may be a part of a work plan going forward to kind of sort some of those things out. Even the notion of insurance, that's for as a lawyer, I'm looking at that one because I don't think anyone's really linking losing your insurance, the cost of insurance, with building in an area that has high fire risk, and that would be an interesting court for a case for Ms. Couch to bring up to the Supreme Court at some day. So that is an interesting one because that's what's practically happening in our community. And it's not lost on me that I do agree that not all housing is good housing. I agree with that. I do, in my heart of hearts, believe that we do better